Welcome back to the Bears Talk Ireland podcast with myself, Noel Dowling, as we continue to look into the Chicago Bears offseason and continue to talk about moves made by the Bears as they look to put a disappointing season last year behind them. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Shapiro from CHSN, who's nicely jumped on with me just to kind of cover off what's happened so far with the Bears and how we think things are looking going into the season. So, Alex, appreciate you taking the time. Welcome to the new show. The last time I talked to you, there was under a different banner, but we're going with the Bears one here now.
Love it. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Noel. It's always a pleasure talking to you, man.
So for yourself now, just looking at the Bears season, obviously we were talking off air before we came on about how it's starting to look kind of positive this year, because we know year in, year out, there's certain topics and it can feel a bit desperate to get things going. This year, it feels like they've made some big moves. I mean, I don't want to go too much into the coaching hires and stuff because it feels like so long ago that it happened. But I do want to touch off it just to kind of get your own idea of what you think of the moves that have been made. So obviously the Bears bring in Ben Johnson as the head coach. I mean, for you, was this the right move for the Bears to do? Is this the guy who you thought was the one they should zero in on and they should try and make happen?
Yeah, so I, throughout the whole kind of offseason coaching cycle process, had it narrowed down to two guys, really, and then I'll bring in a third. One was obviously Ben Johnson. I mean, he is the hot shot coordinator candidate for a reason. We've seen what his offenses can do in Detroit. They were super balanced. It's not like it was just run attack. It was just pass attack. He had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery having incredibly productive seasons. He took Jared Goff, a reclamation project, tossed aside by the Los Angeles Rams, and turned him into, in my opinion, an MVP candidate in Detroit. I mean, playing at an incredibly high level. And he did it consistently. It wasn't just a flash in the pan thing. He did it a lot. And then obviously the play design, the fun stuff. That's all great. But with the offensive coordinators who become head coaches, there's always a question of how are you going to be as a leader? How are you going to be as a CEO of a team? And obviously, with a bunch of guys, the Sean McVays of the world, the Kyle Shanahans of the world, the Kevin O'Connells of the world, et cetera, you don't know until you give them a shot. So somebody's got to give them a shot. And if you land the guy, that's amazing because he's probably going to he's going to be your coach for a long time. So you got to give him a shot if you want him to be that guy, but you simply don't know, right? Matt Nagy was also the offensive guru who did this great stuff, in Kansas City and worked with Patrick Mahomes, all of those wonderful things, and then it just didn't work out. Matty Eberflus also an excellent coordinator. This guy was a great defensive coordinator, both with the Colts, and he was a great defensive coordinator with the Bears. The CEO thing didn't work out. The timeouts, the time management didn't work out, right? So there's that factor. So then that's one category. The other category was Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel, we know, can command a team, can command a room. There were questions about his ability to develop a quarterback. There was questions about what are you going to do on offense because the Titans' offenses weren't very good unless he had Arthur Smith at the helm. So it's like, if you could combine those two guys, that would be perfect, but you can't. And then when it became clear that Mike Vrabel was going to the Patriots, that became clear pretty quickly. I was looking at Brian Flores, who is another guy who I thought could be a great CEO. So I was looking at two buckets. And I saw Tom Brady was interested in Ben Johnson. I was like, okay, if this is Tom Brady's guy, he should probably be everybody's guy. So I think the Bears have done a phenomenal job by going out, getting Ben Johnson. Right? They did it. They did what it took to bring him in. A+ for all of that. It's still to be determined how he is leading a coach. And I'm not trying to be a downer. Like, I have no reason to believe he won't be a great head coach. He won't be a great CEO. There's no reason for me to believe that. It's just like we've seen it so many times that it's just like, okay, let's wait and see. But for now, every reason to be extremely optimistic because he is an incredible coordinator. He's an incredible play designer. And it'll be very interesting to see how he is as a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with pretty much everything you said there. So I was in the same boat as yourself. I usually go into these kind of coaching hire kind of situations, and I kind of worry about the lack of experience, top coordinator coming in. But as you say, I mean, they were all that at one point. Somebody has to give these guys a job to let them go on and develop into the Sean McVays and all those other kind of top coaches. And for some reason, it just felt a little bit different with Ben Johnson, because Matt Nagy is obviously the one that, non-Bears fans who I know were throwing at me, just another Matt Nagy. But they are very different situations. That was an Andy Reid offense that Matt Nagy called some plays toward the end of the season. This is Ben Johnson's offense. This is, as you say, he worked with, the quarterback, the running backs, the wide receivers, these players who he really schemed up into fantastic positions, and they went on obviously to have a fantastic offense. But he just feels different to that kind of Matt Nagy type coordinator who was running somebody else's offense. So for me, I think it was impressive from the Bears. I think even if it doesn't work out, and you're spot on, nobody knows how this is going to go. I do feel the Bears have at least gone and made the right move, the best move that they could make. Now, again, if it doesn't work, that happens and we roll with it. We're used to it in Chicago. It'll happen again. But I mean, I think they've gone out in the offseason and done the best kind of possible job in getting the top guy in and kind of work from there. But now when we kind of branch that out a bit and we look at the team he's put together, I mean, obviously you look at Antoine Randall as the assistant head coach and the wide receivers coach. Declan Doyle is a young, unproven kind of coach who's come in, taking a big step up to offensive coordinator. But again, as I say, it's Ben Johnson's offense, so you don't worry too much about that. And then Dennis Allen, someone really experienced as a defensive coordinator, with Al Harris coming in, and Eric Bieniemy, who, there's been some talk of the last couple of days of how he's the running back coach, and a lot of people in the league are impressed with the Bears able to get him in as running back coach. So when you look at the team he's put in around him as a whole, again, is that impressive to you? Does that kind of fill you with confidence? And do you see kind of positives then going forward over, for example, last year's coaching staff, who we know that descended really quickly, issues on the field and off with, with coaches like Getsy going early, and then obviously Eberflus.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly impressive. I'll throw a couple more names in there. JT Barrett, quarterbacks coach, and Dan Roshar, the offensive line. And again, it feels like these coaches fit into two buckets, and I think they are two very important buckets. One is extremely experienced, has been there, can be a support for Ben Johnson, who is a first-time head coach. Dennis Allen has been a head coach before, has gone through some of the pitfalls, is also an extremely experienced defensive coordinator, so that, let's be honest, Ben Johnson can just be like, Dennis Allen, you're the head coach of the defense, in a similar way that, like Buddy Ryan was the head coach of the defense in those 86 Bears. I'm not saying that Ben Johnson won't be in those meetings and won't have his fingerprints on it, but that's important that he will be able to delegate that much, right? Same thing with Dan Roshar. Huge, wealth of experience at that position. And then you also have the guys who have played the positions before. And I think that is also really important. That is something that I think he took out of Dan Campbell's playbook with Detroit. The Detroit Lions had a lot of coaches who played the game at those positions. Eric Bieniemy fits both categories. Very experienced as a running backs coach, was also a running back. Al Harris, he's been there. So he can relate to these players in a way that others just can't. If you haven't put on the cleats and put on the helmet and lined up on Sundays, that is a unique experience and a unique way to relate to these players. So again, A+, we'll see how it turns out. But in terms of off-season stuff, just a phenomenal job putting a staff together. Really, really impressive staff from Ben Johnson.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is. It as I say, on paper, it looks really good, and we'll see how that kind of develops from September on, or even before then. Obviously, when we see how when they get the players into the building and we see them starting working with them. But I mean, talking about players, and obviously the Bears, and it's not just being big moves in the coaching ranks. It's being they were quick out of the traps when it came to free agency, and even prior to free agency, they were very aggressive in making moves for Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney coming in big trades before free agency even kicked off. I mean, I talk about the say the aggressiveness they were going out and getting Ben Johnson, the number one guy out there. How impressive was it in terms of player signings that they were aggressive, not only being forced out of the blocks, really, or very quickly out of the blocks, bringing in obviously Drew Dahlman as the new centre, but getting those guys for the offensive line prior to free agency? And do you kind of see Ben Johnson's fingerprints on these moves, maybe players he's been with before and who he's comfortable with and knows? So basically, how impressed have you been with what they've done with the playing roster as well as that kind of coaching staff?
Yeah, again, everybody knew that the trenches on both sides of the ball were the big need for this team. And I do see, as you asked, I do see Ben Johnson's fingerprints on it because, in the past, the Bears had these lighter, athletic, that was kind of the highlight, light, athletic guys who could really move in the interior of the offensive line. And I'm saying Drew Dahlman and Jonah Jackson and Joe Tooney, I'm not saying they're not athletic, but they are much bigger guys than what the Bears had in there previously. And that, again, is similar to what the Lions had. The Lions had a much heavier offensive line than the Bears. So now we're seeing that weight go up. What is something we heard coming out of the owners' meetings this week about Braxton Jones? Yeah, the rehab's going well. He's on track. He might be limited, and we want him to gain some weight. So this is where I think we are seeing Ben Johnson's fingerprints on the offensive line. And it was important. And I think Ryan Poles has done a good job, and we should commend him for the work he's done up to this point of keeping his powder dry in past seasons, not blowing a ton of salary cap space while he was really rebuilding the core of this roster. Now, you could argue that maybe he should have done some last year in the trenches, but the point remains that, he wasn't in a situation that the Falcons are in now because they signed Kirk Cousins to such a ludicrous contract that they had to let Drew Dahlman go. They had to let all these guys go, right? Grady Jarrett. That financial flexibility that Ryan Poles afforded himself allowed the team to make all of these moves. So that's great. And, you look at it's a holistic view, right? It's not just free agency. It's not just the draft. It's not just who's available in trade. Ryan Poles, I think, has done a good job of looking at the full menu of how can we improve our roster and identifying, okay, we can get these guys via trade, we can get this guy via free agency, and then maybe we address this in the draft. And they're not done. Obviously they're not done. But it's an excellent, excellent start to really transform the interior of that line very quickly.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of going to touch on next. It is the interior, because we know year in, year out, we talk about the Bears offseason and we talk about the offensive line, and it's like musical chairs at times. We don't know who's in, we don't know who's out, and it kind of flips about. Sometimes we kind of fool ourselves into thinking they fixed it. I think I kind of was there last year, and then very quickly you find out they haven't. But now we look at the moves. Obviously, Jonah Jackson will win at right guard. Joe Tooney, who is one of the top left guards in the NFL, will slot in there. And then, as mentioned, Drew Dahlman. So, I mean, how impressive has it been to completely transform this offensive line? Because, again, for the first time as a Bears fan, I can go into the season now saying, injury permitting, I can guarantee you I can name 4 starters on that offensive line, possibly 5. We have the Braxton Jones question, and will they draft someone? Can Karan Amagaji come in? But for the most part, I can name 4 starters on that offensive line. How important is that for a team, for a young quarterback like Caleb Williams, who obviously, had a good and bad season last year? There were some really good parts in there, but then we look at 68 sacks, and, you want to give that quarterback who is basically carrying this franchise on his shoulders. Where he goes, we will essentially go.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it just getting that interior sorted and getting that consistency, hopefully, on an offensive line, and then you can build around that?
It's incredibly important. And I think I'm going to elaborate on something you said, which is consistency and getting the offensive line sorted. And you kind of touched on it, but I think this is the actual key, is that it is sorted. Last season, what did we have? We had Coleman Shelton and Ryan Bates and Nate Davis, and they're all kind of flopping around. Coleman Shelton is taking first team reps at center one day, and Ryan Bates is taking right guard first team reps that same day. And then the next day we've got Nate Davis in at right guard, and we've got Ryan Bates playing center, and Tevin Jenkins is at left guard. But then, it was kind of a little bit of musical chairs going around in the interior of that line as they were on their eternal quest to find the best five. The Bears do not have that issue this year. Joe Thuney is your left guard. Drew Dahlman is your center. And Jonah Jackson is your right guard. There is not going to be that musical chairs, as you said, to find where guys fit. The Bears already know where everybody is slotting in. And that will allow them to have consistency throughout the summer, as you said, injury permitting. And I think that is huge, that you have guys in spots already before they even go on the grass. Now, the Bears do need, I think, to increase their depth, right? Ryan Bates is still on this team. Karan Amagaji still on this team, as you mentioned. Ryan Bates, injury prone. Karan Amagaji, we didn't really get a good look at him last year. We saw some good stuff, and then obviously the start he had in, I believe it was Minnesota, was just an unfortunate situation for him. Kind of a tough position to be able to perform there. So there to me are some question marks, and you can never have too many offensive linemen. I don't think the job is done. I think the Bears would do well to add more guys in the interior and more guys at the edges as well. So the work remains unfinished because guys do go down on the offensive line. It's just kind of a fact of life. Injuries are going to happen there. If you don't have an injury on the offensive line, that is a blessed season for whatever team. But as you said, it's a great start. This is a phenomenal foundation, but I think the work remains unfinished.
Yeah, and as I say, the one kind of question mark on that offensive line is Braxton Jones. I know he's come back from injury, and as you mentioned, Ben Johnson talked about, he maybe needs to reshape his body a little bit and get a bit of weight on to kind of work on that anchor. But still, when you look at a player like that, and I agree with you, we absolutely need to get depth in there. I mean, the successful teams are the ones that draft O-linemen every single year, and you see those guys coming through. I mean, I was going to touch on the draft later, but I'll kind of touch now on the draft for the offensive line. Do they need to find a starter in the offensive line to come in now, or can you kind of draft on prospects later on that you think can develop into a player kind of going forward? And for Braxton Jones, with those question marks, if he is fit, does playing beside Joe Thuney, help him develop and become that better player? I mean, I guess I'm asking, can we live with Braxton Jones there now if he's fit? And obviously, as you say, still draft offensive linemen later on to kind of bring in, or do they need to find an offensive lineman to start in the early kind of rounds? Because I know that's the big question at the moment. People want running back, people want O-line, people want D-line. Like, where do they need to find that offensive lineman?
It's a good question. I think to start, yes, Joe Thuney will make Braxton Jones better. I do believe that, that having that guy with that much experience, who's super solid connected to your hip, who's super durable connected to your hip, where again, Tevin Jenkins was kind of in and out of the lineup a bunch, that will help Braxton Jones. And I do think that Braxton Jones, when healthy, is solid, like a serviceable left tackle. The injury, though, there's the injury X factor is an X factor. The Bears still need to see how he is coming off that ankle. It was a serious injury that required surgery. So that, to me, again, is a question mark. So I think the Bears are still in a position where they have enough needs at the premium positions. As you mentioned, we haven't talked about D-line that much. They had Dio Adangbo and Grady Jarrett, but they could add another defensive end as well. They need more defensive ends. They could add a young defensive tackle, where I think the Bears can go best player available in with that 10 pick, or if they trade back, whatever, they can go best player available. It doesn't need to be a left tackle there. It can be a defensive tackle. It can be a defensive end. It can be, a number of things. But I do think so. Whether you address left tackle at 10, if Will Campbell is there, which he might not be, I think that's a slam dunk. If you pick up a tackle later, I think it behooves them to add a left tackle at some point, but I don't think it needs to happen at 10. Let's say the Bears have an incredibly high grade, and I'm just speaking out of the blue, pure speculation. I have no idea. But let's say they have an incredibly high grade on Mike Green, and he's there at 10, and they don't want to risk him coming off the board at 11, 12, 13 and trade back. Take him at 10, then just take him at 10 and figure out offensive tackle later. If you think, if you have a top 6 grade or whatever on Mike Green and he's there for you at 10, I don't think they need to pigeonhole themselves into any position group with that 10 pick.
Yeah, no, I think the moves they've made obviously have given them that little bit of a leeway to go best player available rather than kind of being pigeonholed into having to go for a specific, position group. But again, you've mentioned the defensive line and Grady Jarrett and Dayo Odengbo coming in. I mean, kind of both players that seem to be on the opposite end of the scale. Grady Jarrett is that experienced player who can come in and, bring that experience on and off the field as well as the production, in terms of stats and on the field. And then Odengbo is a younger player who it feels like they've kind of, to an extent, bargained on that growth that he could still have within him, that kind of potential. He has the physical attributes for as they said, a Dennis Allen defense. And, he got 8 sacks 2 seasons ago. He only got 3 last year. I think they'll want to work on that. But he does feel like a player that they see an upside and they've gone with him. But there still feels like they could do more in that position. But I think when you look at the draft coming up, on that defensive line, there are players you can find in later rounds if you don't get them, in the top 10. But again, I mean, how confident are you with this defensive line now and the changes they've made? And, how many players do you think they really realistically need to come in there to kind of shore that up? Because obviously, as I said, they brought in 2, but you'll want Javon Dexter to take that step up. Maybe Zach Pickens. There's a lot of questions about whether he can a Grady Jarrett even help those guys develop as NFL players and show them what they need to do. That will be more of what he brings apart from just on the field.
Yeah. Well, the Grady Jarrett part first, this guy is an unbelievable worker, incredibly dedicated to his routine, puts so much energy and resources and time into taking care of his body, taking care of his nutrition, making sure he's studying. I mean, this is a guy who does it the right way. So that is important. If Javon Dexter is talking him up all the time, if I was Javon Dexter, I would have a notebook and I would be chatting this guy's ear off nonstop. What do I need to do to make sure I have a long career like yours? What do I need to do to make sure that I'm as durable, that I can stay on the field as consistently as you do? What do you do? And just learn. So that is important. In terms of just personnel, frankly, I think the work remains unfinished. Andrew Billings, great player, like one of Ryan Pohl's best free agent signings, of his short career. He's coming off the pec injury. It's a similar kind of like injury question mark thing. A pec injury, again, a serious injury. Chris Williams kind of came on towards the end of last year, but they could have another nose, a young nose behind Andrew Billings. It'll be interesting to see how Grady Jarrett and Javon Dexter kind of switch off at 3 tech. But again, Grady Jarrett's not going to be playing forever. He admitted as much. He's like, listen, I know that I'm running out of time. I still got my best ball ahead of me, but it's not like he's going to play another 5-6 years. So adding another defensive tackle, and again, like beyond Dayo Odengbo and Montez Sweat, what do the Bears have? Austin Booker and Dominique Robinson. Is Daniel Hardy still on the team? They need to add guys to that group. They need to continue to add guys to that group. And the pass rush and the run defense, especially in the middle, just was not good enough. It just simply wasn't good enough last year. So they've said it. The Bears have said it themselves so many times. Like trenches. Ben Johnson, this game is won up front. I think they should continue to be adding talent to that group.
Sorry, just 2 of the players that obviously we've talked about, Tooney and Grady Jarrett. I mean, they're older players who maybe have 2-3 years left in them. I mean, do those signings point to the fact that this isn't a head coach that's coming in with a new coaching staff that's going to kind of look down the road to win. These are moves, decent money being paid to these guys who have maybe 2-3 seasons left, that this Bears team want to win now. So whoever they bring in with number 10 needs to be someone that can contribute and can help this team go forward, because they look at a tough division, but the Bears aren't having a bit of a break with a new head coach and coaching staff. They want to make strides and they want to win games now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's what you would want out of any number 10 pick, to be quite honest. But yeah, no, that player at 10 should be starting, or should be probably starting week 1. I would wager if the Bears draft a Will Campbell, that would be an extremely real competition with Braxton Jones. And you might fast track Will Campbell to that week 1 spot, because again, that's the 10th pick in the draft. That is incredibly, incredibly valuable. You really want that guy in the field.
Absolutely. And look, by the time the season comes, who knows how long his arms will be by then? If they're growing between, the last few weeks, by the time the season comes, could be 34. Who knows? But obviously the big question now going into the draft, thankfully we don't have to worry about quarterback. Normally you're going in, quarterback, oh God, can we get up to get one? We don't need that now. We look set there. Hopefully that's the way that'll go. Running back has become a bit of a contentious issue over the last few weeks. Obviously, it was all trenches, but you kind of felt it going, well, if Genty falls, the Bears need to make that move. Then I've started seeing people say, well, never mind if he falls. I think the Bears need to start looking to move up. I don't think they need to do that. But when you look at the running back class, if a Genty is there, do you take him? Or do you look at the fact that there's, Marion Hampton, there's Judkins, there's Henderson. There are some good running backs who you can get later on if you want to kind of get a good player in there. Where do you stand on this? Because it seems like every year there is that contentious, go for this player, go for that player. And it feels like the running back now has vaulted itself to being that contentious topic.
Yeah. If Genty is there at 10, that is going to be an incredibly tough decision for the Chicago Bears. This guy is obviously an unbelievable playmaker, and he does it in so many ways. His contact balance is ridiculous. His home run hitting ability, ridiculous. Projects to be a true difference maker in an offense. This is where I lean on my new head coach, Ben Johnson. We brought you in here to build an explosive offense. Do you need Ashton Genty? Is Ashton Genty your guy? Or can we wait? And can you do it with Brashard Smith? Can you do it with Jadon Blue? Can you do it with, Neal? Can you do it with Judkins, Henderson, Trevor Etienne? There are a lot of very good. Cam Scadaboo, who reminds me a lot of David Montgomery. And he was singing David Montgomery's high praises at the owners' meetings. So I just rattled off a ton of names who are very talented running backs. If Ben Johnson says, oh, yeah, give me Cam Scadaboo, give me Brashard Smith, I'm a cook with that guy, then okay, great. We can kind of turn the page. But if Ben Johnson says, if you give me Ashton Genty, we're going to score 40 points a game, just wait until you see what I scheme up for this guy, I'm drafting Ashton Genty. But I leave it up to the guy. Like the Bears put all these resources into Ben Johnson. It's time to trust him, and it's time to put the keys in his hand.
Absolutely. I think either way, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I don't think Genty will be there, but as you say, if he is there, very interesting decision there for the Bears to make. You mentioned the owners' meetings. Obviously, they've gone on the last couple of days. Bears-wise, does anything kind of jump out of you? Anything that came out of those owners' meetings that kind of perked your interest a bit, or something that's worth kind of talking about?
Yeah, we already talked about one. That's the Braxton Jones of it all. The fact that he might be limited to start training camp, which, that's something to follow throughout the offseason. And then that comment that we wanted to put on weight, that dinged for me. The other thing is hearing Ben Johnson talk about EPA. That is a clip that has kind of made the rounds. I love that. And it's just a microcosm of the philosophical shift that is going to be going on at Hallis Hall with this new Bears team. turnovers are obviously important. I don't think hits was a bad thing. You know, I was down with hits and all that. They measured intensity, they measured hustle, loafs, all of that. Fine. But this new focus on EPA and just bumping that number up however we can, that's a real shift. And I think that's going to it'll be very interesting to see how that manifests itself. We're getting this clue about this philosophical difference. I think he explained it very well. You know, the way he articulated this philosophy, he did very well. So yeah, that was like, okay, we're getting more insight into this is the type of football team you want to run, which is completing passes and moving the ball down the field, and on defense, probably sacking the quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. That's definitely something that's kind of popped up everywhere you kind of look and read now. They're talking about the EPA. And again, it's really interesting to see the way that this new head coach kind of sees the game and how he thinks games are won. One other quick thing I just want to mention from the owners' meetings was Brisker was brought up as a topic of conversation. And, you know, Ben Johnson talked about how you need to know where he is on the field, but then he talked about he can have bad eyes at times. Do we read anything into where Brisker's season is going with the Bears? Because obviously I think this is his last season in terms of contract. He's had the concussion issues. And then the safety position as a whole, Kevin Byard is a little bit older. You know, will Brisker be back? So that's something they need to look at. But I mean, can we take anything from the Brisker comments, or how do you see that kind of developing?
You know, I kind of saw it the same way, so it didn't ding to me as much because, you know, it's similar to the Tevin Jenkins conversation last year. When the guy's on the field and playing to the best of his abilities, playing up to his ceiling, again, a difference maker. You feel him. His presence is there. What do you have one game where he had like 110 tackles in one game, something like that? I think it was like 19, something outrageous. He obviously is adept at taking the ball away, but he's right. And we've criticized Brisker about this in the past. The eyes have been a problem. Sometimes he's not where he should be in the run game because he's caught looking. We've highlighted those plays in the past. They've been highlighted before. And then the concussions are a real concern, you know, not just for the football team, but for Jaquan Brisker, you know, like brain health is serious. So you got to make sure that he's okay. Okay to play football. And now apparently he has cleared the protocol. It seems like something that was there, but yeah, this is something that I think we've discussed. So yeah, safety is also going to be a need. Elijah Hicks has done really well. I think he's been one of the most improved Bears players over his short Bears career, from 7th round draft pick to a guy who was, you know, I thought kind of struggling a bit to find his way when he was on the field on defense, to now a pretty reliable third safety, no matter if it's free safety or strong safety.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you obviously need contingency plans and good depth at every position. But when you have a player like Jaquan Brisker, who has a injury history, I'll say the same thing. Jonah Jackson, injury history. You got to make sure you have a good contingency plan there.
Yeah, no, I can completely agree. And it's going to be interesting to see how that obviously develops going forward. Obviously, as you say, he is a really good player. He will be looking for a new contract, but there are other factors, unfortunately, that will come into play. But again, we'll see how it all kind of develops out. Listen, Alex, really appreciate you taking the time to jump on. If you want to let the guys know where they can find you, anything they should keep an eye out for coming forward or going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow all of our work at Chicago Sports Network, CHSN. Download the CHSN app. We got a YouTube channel. I'm on the Charter podcast with Ruthie Polinsky and Clay Harbor. We have a ton of fun, and we put all sorts of like fun stuff that you don't see on the podcast. Again, on our YouTube page, on our socials, and on our website and app. So for sure, download our app and follow us on social media. We're pretty much like CHSN_Bears or _White Sox, or, you know, wherever you find social media. So that's where you can find us.
Excellent. And I love the podcast. I watch all the time. So it's definitely worth anyone who hasn't checked it out, although I'm sure everyone watching is already well aware of it. But if you're not, absolutely check it out. Definitely worth a watch. And thanks to everyone for watching and listening to this. Please do keep an eye out. Obviously, there's a lot more content coming. And until next time, take care.